Hi, and welcome to The Fault Line, a CMG consulting podcast exploring the pivotal moments where business strategy meets real-world pressure. We've got a terrific guest with us today. My partner, Kim, and I will be talking to Pat Fitzgerald, who's a return guest for us on The Fault Line. The last time he was focused and honed in on digital marketing. Today, our topic is going to be AI, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Always look forward to the topics that we get into. And so, Pat, maybe just a quick refresh on who you are, and then maybe set the table on this AI space, because there's a wide variety of levels of comfort with what that is at this point.
Thanks, Gary and Kim, and thanks for having me back. Always a pleasure to talk to you all, and looking forward to this conversation. So I'm Pat Fitzgerald. I am recently now operating executive with CMG Consulting, focused on the PE space and PE funded companies. And prior to that, I've had I would say at this point a long history in direct to consumer and B2B businesses, particularly around the intersection of marketing and technology. So I've worked with brands like SiriusXM Radio, NFL Game Pass, and CNN, and a number of other smaller firms where I really focus on bringing technology into the marketing space in a variety of different ways, from digital marketing through e-commerce. And of late, as we were discussing here, spending a lot of time figuring out what the impacts of AI are on business and marketing in particular.
Well, first of all, welcome to the team in a more formal sense, and we're excited to have you. And I guess let's start with just a few definitions for folks. And this may be redundant for some of the folks who listen in, but I think it would be helpful to talk about, what's a large language model? What's agentic, AI? What is, generative AI? Because the nuances in the vocabulary may actually be helpful as people start to grapple with, how do I apply these capabilities to help my efforts?
So I love that, right? So I've been in so many meetings, Gary, where we're discussing AI, and there's an implied a lot of implied assumptions as to what it is. I think it comes down to some Supreme Court justice that said, "I know it when I see it." In this case, I do think some of these definitions matter, and I don't want to get too in the weeds or too technical. But if we just look at how it's affecting our work, right, and how folks are interacting with it, I think there are really sort of three levels we can look at, right? First is predictive AI, right? That actually really comes from a lot of stuff we used to do in marketing, or still do in marketing, where I'm going to use AI to predict someone's propensity to churn, right? Where AI is picking it up is the ability to do a lot more math and to be a lot more precise, right? And to do some things that might mitigate that instance. Fraud is another example, right? Banks are using this to determine whether or not your credit card's been compromised. And again, we've been doing that for a while, but AI is sort of accelerating and expanding that. Then sort of moving down, right? The place where most folks right now are interacting with AI is generative AI, straight up ChatGPT, Claude. Say when you're directly working with Gemini or Copilot, you're really dealing with generative AI, which is consuming and integrating large amounts of information, and then, as the name implies, generating a narrative, right? So, and it's the use, and again, my personal use, and I know, all the folks that I've been talking to, is really expanding around the generative side, right? So a deck, a presentation that would have taken, let's say, a week, in all the other detail and knowledge, and especially like the analyst work that goes into that, you can now really do in a couple of hours, right? And I say you could do it faster, and we'll talk about that. But let's say you're thorough enough and you're vetting it. You're spending a couple of hours on something that would have taken you a lot longer to do. So we're certainly getting an accelerant in generative, and that's what most folks experiences in that. And then the last place, and I think the spot where we should spend some time, particularly since the topic that we teed up was really around humans and AI, right?
Yes.
Is agentic, right? Agentic AI. So for this discussion, let's just call that where AI is actually generating a workflow, right, and managing a workflow. And we can use an example like I'll take customer service for a second, right? Sort of marketing adjacent. So a number of folks can put in information and then say, hey, solve this, right? So I'm chatting with the AI. But with agentic, the AI can then go off and solve the problem and come back with responses, right? Let's draw a distinction between that and a chatbot, right? So chatbot is just you're generating a prompt. You put in the prompt, the chatbot goes away. It has some canned responses it can come back with. It can branch. It can do some relatively sophisticated things, but it's much more rules based. The difference with agentic, and this is going to get really important as we go forward in the conversation, is it will start to make decisions. It will start to
Yep.
solve the
It will
problem.
make the choices rather than follow the directions.
So a lot of implications with that, right? In terms of what comes out of that on the other side and what can happen. And now I think, we set the table. We can actually invite people into the conversation and talk about the interactions that come from that.
Well, maybe just to dive in here, and then I'm going to let Kim talk because I know she's dying to.
Just like before we go into the dark future, what's happening today?
Well,
right.
I was just going to
wait. I want to say that though, Kim, because you and I talked about that on our last conversation, right? And I still remain. I think I used the term AI positivist, right? Which I'm sure there's a lot of backlash against fanboys like me, but that's not to say that there's not a lot of profound and fundamental issues around this, right? And we're starting to see this more and more, right? So, just listening to Hard Fork this morning, whole episode on anti-AI, right? And what's evolving around that. So I'm not suggesting we don't go into this, and especially as we're going to talk about humans and AI, like there needs to be some thoughtfulness, certainly, around what the implications are. But I do remain positive that this is going to be net benefit in terms of impact it's going to have on business, and I think outside of that too, in society at large.
Well, let's follow this thought a little bit and play it out because, I'm of a vintage where I've earned many of my gray hairs, in this digital space, right? Been doing stuff webbish and interwebbish since the mid 90s. And, if we cast our minds back with each wave of sort of fundamental innovation or step forward in capability, there are three things that for me are truisms. One, just what you touched on. There are going to be the apocalyptic projections of how this is going to, disrupt life as we know it, and everything's going to be bad, right? Then there's the sort of rosy sort of output, which is way too optimistic about just how delightful life is going to be. And I tend to think that humans muddle through, and we overestimate on both ends of that spectrum. But the third leg is often the novel and unexpected areas of value or utility that help, and this brings it right back to the humans, help us do what humans do. So we may be able to get more information and consume it faster. We may be able to do more analytics, but ultimately the technologies, whether it was the telegraph or the radio or television or the internet or now AI, tend to just help us do more of what we do. And I'm curious how that resonates for each of you, and whether you want to sort of push me towards one of those either rosier or more apocalyptic ends of the spectrum as I think about it.
So first, I want to be clear that telegraph, you're making yourself really old. I definitely did not experience that. Lots of change in my lifetime, but not coming from the telegraph.
Well, my first job in the Pony Express was really a lot of fun.
But I think, there's always fear when something is unknown or ununderstood. And I think part of what we strive to achieve on this podcast is helping people understand things better. And so, even where we started out with the definitions of the different types of AI that exist, I know for myself, I have many conversations with colleagues, clients, and friends about the fear that exists of, well, if we put our information in there, then our information's out there. Guess what? Your information's already out there. So let's eliminate that fear right off the bat. And when it comes to, organizations using generative AI specifically, there's ways to protect the information you put in. And so I think if there's one thing you take away from this is don't let that hold you back. Go into your settings of your favorite AI tool and make sure it's not learning. And that problem is solved for you. So if we don't adapt, we will be left behind. And I think that's why we do these episodes, is to help people keep moving with the times, which are changing quickly.
Well, I think taking from both of you, right? So Gary, we can compare digital shark bite scars from the last 25 plus years, and it's been constant change, right? Since the dawn of the internet and everything that's evolved, including social media and mobile and just all the other things that have really changed and affected not just our work and marketing broadly and business broadly, but our lives, totally. So this is the next thing, and I do think this one merits, right, particularly given where we are and what we've seen happen. And I'll just, certainly pick on social media a bit, because when that came about, everybody thought, this is going to be great. We're all going to live in perfect harmony in the future and be connected with everyone, and everyone's going to be friends. And clearly that's not the case, right? Clearly we've seen a lot of things that have gone, pretty horribly wrong in the way that narrative has evolved. So I do think it is appropriate to look at where we are with AI, with both the sort of upside, the rose-colored glasses, right, Gary, but also with a very big note of caution. And I get where people push back, because yeah, this is especially for folks, who invested a lot in their education and have worked really hard. This is about as disruptive as we're going to see, right? We're talking about, engineers, right, getting, sort of replaced by AI, right? So I do think we need to look at that. The thing here, though, is I'm sort of, I mean, because if I go really far down, it is like, all right, well, this is just a science fiction movie, and we're all going to be, scavenging for food and Tina Turner and Thunderdome. But if I look at the coexistence hypothesis, or follow that down the road, right? I do think that there's a lot of benefit here in augmentation, and then you get into, what is AI good at least today. I'm not going to make any predictions for next month or next week, but for today, what is it good at, and where does that exist with with people? And I think at the end of the day, what really comes down, we can do a lot of things faster. We can create decks, we can create content, we can do all of that. We still need judgment, right? And that's where people really come into play. And I, like you, Gary, been around the sun a few more times. I actually think it does really play well for folks with experience and judgment, right?
Yes.
And I think you have to value that even more in this, right? That really just gets to sort of the generative side. I think we also should talk about where agentic starts to take us if we're not applying these sort of human judgment and factors to it as well.
And maybe this is a way to bridge into some of those discussions. There's an element for me, having worked with a lot of companies that bend and pour metal over the years, right? As we think about what factory automation did, right? The installation of machinery and robots to take on repetitive tasks, to provide a greater level of precision in certain tasks. It fundamentally changed manufacturing, not just in the U.S., but around the world. And I go back to times talking to the head of design at Nike many, many years ago when he said to me, "We know how to build shoes without people, but it doesn't make sense for us to build shoes without people for a variety of reasons." And, as we think about what's happening now in a different quadrant of the economy, right? For the software engineers out there, some of what they were doing that was essentially production, AI can do pretty well. But to your point, how to architect the solution, how to coach, how to think through a more elegant, path to the solution is a space where some interesting things start to happen in the interaction between a human and a capable AI agent. You're both, for anybody who's just listening,
Because
both
you
Kim
and I
and
had,
Pat are
yeah.
nodding their heads. So I'm going to
Yeah,
shut up now. Keep
Because
going,
you
both
and I
of you.
had a conversation this morning that was about the kind of thinking that happens when you work in the software development space, when you're trying to solve complex problems, right? Gary and I are having one of our many random conversations. And when we talk about it this way, and it's instead of me, former business analyst me, trying to figure out what the technical requirements needed to be to build an auctions engine, to build a sweepstakes engine, and now sitting down with my AI partner instead of maybe a software developer, and I am able to get closer to what the technical specs should be before I have that conversation. So we're cutting out some time, but we're not using just what AI tells us to do. I'm partnering, right? I still have the human
absolutely.
side that understands all of the human interactions that need to happen with an auction, with a sweepstakes and things like that are a machine couldn't understand.
And you hit on that. You hit the nail on the head there, Kim, too, with speed, right? So innovation comes also from trial and error. And I obviously humans are going to have a lot more influence over how things innovate, but we can get there faster, right? Because we can try things, we can test things, they can fail. Even on the software engineering side, I mean, they're always trying to figure out better, faster ways to do it. And usually, what the constraint is, why software is always imperfect, is they don't have all that time. They don't have an infinite amount of time, and they can't run all the potential scenarios, even that they can to come up with. Well, AI helps with that, right? So
Well,
we
and,
can
and
get
like bringing that point to home, we want to get to market faster because until our product is in the hands of a customer, we actually don't know if it's solving their problem. So if we can do that even quicker, we had another guest on an episode a few episodes ago who wrote a book called Hyper Adaptive, which is just about that. It's about using AI to learn faster.
absolutely, absolutely. By the way, it's learning pretty fast too. So I
Yeah.
can remember that when I got my first subscription to ChatGPT, it's like it's it's a pretty good fifth grader,
Mm-hmm.
and that was like
Yeah.
only like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It's going it's learning pretty quick too.
So a theme here for me, and I want to get your responses to it. You know, there is this fulcrum for me, this point of leverage in which people can use AI to enhance what they're bringing themselves, their experience, their judgment. Pat, you and I touched on recently their taste, right? The aesthetics and things like that. And then there's this sort of tipping point where people may outsource their judgment to AI, which to me is sort of the signal of the danger zone. And I'm curious from your experiences of late how you've seen that same set of characteristics either play out well or some cautionary tales.
I think that the danger embedded in that, Gary, is all of a sudden everybody thinks that they're a designer or even a TV commercial producer, right? You can generate a lot of things. Just because you can do that does not make those things good. I mean, you can go all the way back to PageMaker, right, in the early days, right? And everybody's, this is the death of graphic design, and it certainly wasn't. Graphic designers embrace those tools and up the game. I do think what it does is it does raise the bar and it raises the middle, right? So you can get a lot of pretty good things. I'm going to call them average, right? With less and with folks that aren't necessarily what we would have considered subject matter experts in the past, right? let's say it's even 80%, right? And we always, a lot of times you talk about the 80% solution, good enough, right? I don't think that's going to be good enough. I think, 80% now is not going to get you to the goal line. And that last 20%, right? That's where humans come in. That's where judgment comes in. That's where taste comes in. That's where strategy comes in, right? So yeah, AI can reason, but what AI can't do, right, in the meeting is say, don't say that thing you're about to say because it's going to cause the CFO to blow his gasket, right? That's
Or
something.
look at the body language of your senior
Yeah.
vice president
Exactly,
and use
exactly,
your judgment before you
exactly
open
right.
your mouth. Yes.
Exactly right. So we can get to a better place. We can get to a more thorough, more in-depth place. But that last 20%, you can't because we are still going to be dealing with humans as ultimately decision makers, fingers crossed, at least as long as I'm continuing to
Yeah.
work.
Well, what I just heard
Um,
is my job is safe as an observational coach because it can't look out at people and learn yet.
exactly. So, and I, that part, I don't think we can fully, uh, uh, you know, uh, fully envision into the future. So that last 20% and how things get actually done in business and in organizations, I think is really where humans are going to, not only shine, but actually up their game and improve.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the benefit for me in a lot of application of AI, there's certain automations, bidding on keywords in search engine marketing, right? AI is incredibly good at that because again, it it can go faster. And what we've seen is, and Pat, this was the subject of some offline conversations you and I had a while back, is okay, so search engine marketing has lost a lot of its arbitrage opportunities for advantage. And so now what? Well, old school brand authority is coming back to the fore
Absolutely.
because, the people out there who are trying to succeed can't rely on what they've been doing for the last 10 years in search because search is just table stakes now. And what AI is doing is disintermediating. It's going out, it's doing the research, it's saying, you know what, search results are a hassle now. I'm just going to give you 3 recommendations for that TV that you're interested in. And I'm going to even tell you which outlet I think has the best deal right now. So you go buy it. To the user, that feels really, really good, right? To the supplier, to the brands who are trying to present themselves there, that creates a new set of challenges. In some cases, it could be solved through historic behaviors. Hey, it'd be good if we had a lot of media coverage, or if there were conversations on Reddit where there's a question and we're the answer. The flip side, though, I think is when we think about some of the internal work that gets done, building strategy, generating creative options, putting presentations together, things of that nature, even doing analytics, the thing that I appreciate is the triangulation of approach, right? And there's some good research out there that would say AI plus a human delivers better results than even multiple human experts and much better than AI by itself. And again, Kim, Pat, how does that
And
fit with your experiences? Or is it an area where you're like, oh, that makes me curious about these other things?
so better is an interesting word. Is my gut reaction to what you just said. It can deliver results faster. We can learn faster. They may actually be not better, but we'll learn that they're not better sooner.
Faster. Yeah.
So it's not just the better part, it's being able to interpret the information to know what better for your customer is. On the other point that you were making, I've got a client right now that is on a regular basis having conversations of we actually don't know what comes up in the search results anymore when people search for
Correct.
a topic.
That is
And
correct.
so from that, brand awareness perspective, things are changing where we always went to figure out, oh, we've got to optimize keywords. That's not necessarily the whole game anymore.
I'm going to pitch another episode on the effect that AI is having on search, because
Dude. Yes.
I, I've,
Yes.
I've, I've been spending a lot of time on exactly that. And you want to talk about a place where AI is fundamentally changing and actually, you want to say disruption, but I'm working with like a publishing client that's lost, 40% of their traffic because AI is harvesting their content and nobody clicks through, right? So, but that it is what it is too, right? I mean that's they're not going to put the genie back in the bottle because that changed. We've been doing that for decades now. So we have to figure out a way to do it. And branding and really thoughtful differentiation and those things is also the thing that AI is looking at. The pivot that I want to make though, right, is like we still are talking about sort of generative things, even SEO, right? When you generate content and things like that, that's just creating content using AI to create more, create it faster. The place, and you touched on it, Gary, and I think it's interesting, but I would be very careful. And there's lots of places in marketing where you start to use the agents, right, to
Yes.
do things that involve money and they involve scale. And the cautionary tale there is we all know, right, and we all experience AI makes mistakes, right? When AI hallucinates in an answer it gives you in a generative case, right, in ChatGPT, you're like, that's silly, that's stupid, that doesn't make sense. When AI makes a mistake in the agentic sense, where it's managing a scalable workflow, your email campaign that's going out to 500,000 people just got really complicated, right? So, those are the kinds of things I think, we also have to look at, right? Because, this thing can be, a teenager with a car, right? You want some controls in place. You don't want it totally unfettered, because once you start to put it into the workflow systems that go out and touch your customers, you can have some real challenges. Or when it's using money, right? When it's spending, against media or something like that.
And there's, it's interesting the nuance between where we started the conversation with some customer service chatbots,
Yep.
where it follows rules, and then if the bot is confused or reaches the end of its script, it says, "I'm going to connect you to a human being." And the difference between that and AI is AI will boldly move right past that to say, based on my knowledge and capability, this is what I recommend, or this is what I'm going to do. And putting that into some context, and this is, I'm going to use a generative example to show some of the challenges in the agentic space. If we don't tell AI not to try to please us, it will sometimes look at two requirements: accuracy and make my user think that I'm doing good by them. And it doesn't know how to calibrate those, and will come back with something that sounds good, looks good, seems good, but may be completely false. And there's all kinds of examples of that in the media, et cetera. And if you put an AI capability into, let's say, a review of creative bids or some sort of procurement or doing analytics, there are times where it's into its own new space. And you mentioned it, chat a few years ago felt like a really solid fifth grader. These technologies, to a great extent, have massive intellectual or reasoning capability. They can process a lot, but they don't necessarily have the refined judgment or the emotional maturity to understand this is a moment when I need to ask for help.
It's like the
And
difference between somebody who's book smart but doesn't have any common sense, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're
yes,
talking.
yeah, and
Now,
thank you for
and
finishing it in tidy fashion. Yes.
I would add to that, and is incredibly overconfident.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
just
So it's like a
oblivious to their
teenager.
own
Like, I
weaknesses,
have
right?
2 of these at home right now. It's a teenager.
Yeah. And, we talk in human terms about the development of risk sensitivity, right? And adolescent guys are world famous for being adolescent guys because the concept of, is this too risky, is still not fully formed, right? And AI, to a great extent, is in that mode, right? I don't want to call them teenage boys because they don't, AI doesn't smell
Let's
like a
just say
teenage boys'
the
room, but
frontal cortex has not been fully developed yet.
yeah, yeah. And, and we're chasing this marvelous thing between our ears, which is the human brain. And even on an agentic basis, there is massive capability to look at complex workflows and allow the technology to take them on and do right. But going back to my robotics example, if a screw is not put in precisely, if it's off by just a slight angle or doesn't get the last quarter turn in a complex assembly process, the whole thing can fall apart. And that stack up of variables and allowing somebody who, or a technology that doesn't have that risk concern or consideration into that space, that's where some adventure happens.
So I want to parse that out a bit, right? Because actually, I think the screw example is a really good example where AI linked to robotics or whatever is good, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it won't make those errors, right? And it can do, and this is the thing with computers forever, but now, amping it up with AI is they're great at repetitive tasks that humans, get bored and fall
100%.
asleep, right? The other thing to add to that, as we're starting to look at this, is really good at pattern recognition. Way better than people are, right? Way better than humans, right?
And way different than humans. It looks
yeah,
at things differently than humans.
yeah, and I think there's huge advantage to that, and that's where some of the reasoning comes in. I do think that there is a danger, right? And we're doing it here, right? You can't anthropomorphize AI too much, right? It does have reasoning. It does all of those things, right? Um, but the one place, and this is as we start to get into dealing with coworkers, and at the end of the day, we're in the real world and we deal with people. So even as businesses, right? Ultimately, we have customers. We have folks that are working to serve those customers and get returns, for stakeholders and shareholders. Um, what AI doesn't have, and as far as I can tell, again, hopefully not in the really foreseeable future, it doesn't have emotional intelligence, right? Not in the real sense, right? You said read the room. Obviously, these are things that we learn as humans, right, to get along as a species. And AI is not going to have that, but that's why the combination of the two yields some pretty powerful things, right? So I would say like just understanding what it's going to get, what it's good at, and what it's going to keep getting better at, and really the areas where it doesn't exist. And I think that's how you actually everyone, Kim, and I know you're doing a lot of coaching and things like that. I mean, everybody really needs to look at how is this thing really going to affect my real work, and what should I be willing to give up, right? And what do I really want to make sure I maintain, because those are the things that I'm good at, that I can differentiate as.
That's the part of the consideration for me, Pat, is to reflect on where the tool, because AI is essentially a tool for us, can be best applied. And sometimes, and I've seen this play out with clients and with friends, they'll actually outsource their thinking to AI and
For sure.
then go do an expense report, right? And the
Upside down.
idea is
Upside
to
down, right?
turn that the other way around and say, listen, there's a
Exactly.
repetitive task. If I give you these inputs, please take care of it. That's a really good agentic application. Here's a bunch of inputs. The process. Take care of it for me so that I can sit back and ponder what is the emotional relevance of our value proposition for the people we serve. And then you can use AI and sort of red team it to, have it ask you questions or poke holes in your thinking or help you refine it. But understanding not to invert the value of the human and take on what, is essentially turning a screw over and over and over again.
I think that's a great sort of framework and analogy, right? I think look, a lot of folks are nervous about this, and I think rightfully so. But everybody's got to ask the question, right? And even if you're a marketing manager down in the basement of the organization, right? It's good to ask those questions and say, hey, what am I doing that this thing can do better than me, and start to lean into that. And then where should I be spending that other time, right? Not scrolling through endless TikToks, but figuring out how to add much more strategic value. Because the other thing, especially when we're talking about marketing and product and things like that, right? Adding value to folks, man, that is difficult. that is where you get competitive advantage and where you need to go through those creative and intellectual cycles to get there. Um, so yeah, spot on, right? Use it where it makes sense. Use it to generate, base levels of content, but then make sure you're spending the time in what's going to really drive value for people and then the organization.
So a few themes that I've heard play out, right? AI as an efficiency boost, right? AI as a solution for repetitive but sometimes complex tasks. AI as an iteration amplifier, right? Helps us through the learning cycles quicker. AI as an analyst that brings other perspectives to us. But ultimately, AI is not a substitute for humanity and human creativity. So as I sort of play that back, any closing thoughts, Kim or Pat, before we wrap up this episode?
So I think where I would sort of leave with there is what you just described, Gary. I'll just call the 80%, right? It does raise the waterline, right? It gets us to where we want to go or moves us in the direction we want to go faster. That last 20% that AI can't do, that involves understanding the world as humans see the world, understanding the organization, understanding customers. That's the magic spot where AI gets us there, gets us to that spot faster. But 20% is going to matter a great deal because guess what? Everybody else gets that 80% too. Your organization and it doesn't have a lock on that this is something that's open and available to everybody. So assume everybody else is doing this. So what are you going to do to really drive that? And that last 20% is going to make all the difference for organizations, and therefore if you're in tune with that, it's going to make it for you as you for you personally, for an individual personally.
Yeah, I would say also just a quick plug. If your organization, if you feel like you're not yet at that 80%, that's a space where we at CMG can help you. That is for many organizations part of the challenge today, because we're in this interstitial flux period where AI is emerging as a capability, and we can bring some cross-pollination from different industries and help get through that curve. Kim, any closing thoughts?
So I think for me, we talk a lot about efficiency when it comes to utilizing AI, but we cannot forget to measure effectiveness. And so just because we're doing more things faster does not mean they're the right things. So,
Yes.
For sure.
use the AI tools to help you measure what is actually effective as well, because more things just potentially creates more noise for your audiences rather than delivering more value.
Yeah. And on that last point, don't substitute asking AI a question for actually going and asking the people you serve. Because AI will go look at what's already been generated in the past, but the novel, the new, the emerging sentiment or need is not something that it's necessarily going to make the leap to. And so again, it's just one of those call outs, like engage with other humans, and then bring it together with the capabilities of AI to do more things, to do the same things faster, and potentially, to your comment, Kim, earlier, try to get something better. Right? Good. Well, thank you, Pat. Love having you back on the show, and very much appreciate that you're becoming a more formal member of our CMG consulting team. Kim, as always, thank you for the perspective and insights. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate each and every one of you. Tell your friends about us, and find The Fault Line anywhere you get your podcasts, or come to cmgconsulting.com. Until the next time, thanks.